a bright young girl with dreams of becoming a filmmaker, a privileged yet dangerous teenager with a history of violence, and a night that changed everything. When Anès Maran went out with friends, she had no idea she was walking into a deadly trap. What led to her horrifying fate, and how did justice finally catch up with her killer? Hey, true crime fans. I'm your host, Eamon, and I'm thrilled to share crime tales across times with you. Each episode, we'll explore a new case, examining the evidence and discussing the twists and turns. My goal is to create a community where we can discuss these cases, share our thoughts, and learn from each other. So, let's get started. Anès Maran was born in 1999 into a well-off French family, growing up in a privileged and comfortable environment. Her parents ensured she had access to the best education and opportunities, fostering an upbringing filled with culture, travel, and exposure to the arts. From a young age, Anès exhibited a natural curiosity and enthusiasm for creative expression, particularly in the field of cinema. Described by those who knew her as cheerful, ambitious, and full of life, Anès had a vibrant personality that made her well-liked among her peers. She was sociable and outgoing, easily making friends and enjoying an active social life. However, her true passion lay in filmmaking. From an early age, she dreamed of becoming a director, often immersing herself in movies, analyzing cinematography, and even attempting to create short films with whatever resources she had. Despite her privileged background, Anès was not immune to the challenges of adolescence. Like many teenagers, she faced struggles with identity, friendships, and influences that shaped her formative years. At the age of 13, she became involved with a troubled group of friends who led her into a rebellious phase. Her behavior and choices began to concern her parents, who feared she might stray from the promising future they envisioned for her. Determined to steer her back on the right path, Anès's parents made the difficult decision to transfer her to a private boarding school. They believed a more structured environment, away from negative influences, would help her refocus on her ambitions and provide her with the discipline needed to succeed. This transition marked a turning point in Anès Maran's life, shaping the events that followed and ultimately influencing her journey in ways no one could have predicted. On the evening of November 16, 2011, Anès Maran and a group of friends were granted permission to leave their boarding school for a night out in town. It was meant to be a brief escape from their strict school routine, a chance to relax, socialize, and enjoy themselves before returning to campus. The group explored the city's lively streets, stopping at a cafe for drinks and laughter, completely unaware that this night would take a tragic turn. As the evening progressed, Anès seemed distracted. She was constantly checking her phone and appeared to be in a hurry. At one point, she pulled her close friend Estelle aside, confiding in her that she planned to meet someone later that night, a young man whose identity she did not reveal. Estelle later recalled that Anès seemed both excited and nervous about this meeting, but she did not press her friend for more details at the time. Around 9:45 p.m., Anès separated from the group, promising to catch up with them later. Witnesses last saw her walking alone toward a quieter part of town, where she was expected to meet this mysterious individual. However, as the hours passed, she never returned. By midnight, worry had spread among her friends. Calls and text messages to her phone went unanswered. At first, they assumed she had lost track of time, but as the night stretched on with no word from her, concern turned into fear. By morning, it was clear that something was terribly wrong. When Anès failed to show up at school the next day, authorities were alerted. A frantic search was launched, with investigators retracing her last known steps. Flyers with her photo were distributed across the city, and local news channels covered her disappearance, urging anyone with information to come forward. But despite these efforts, there was no sign of Anès. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. As the frantic search for Anès Maran intensified, investigators turned their attention to a name that kept surfacing: Matteo Mulas. A 17-year-old student known for his volatile nature. Anès had confided in her close friend Estelle that she planned to meet someone that night, though she had been vague about the details. When Estelle described the mysterious figure, others immediately suspected Matteo. Matteo Mulas was a 17-year-old student from a wealthy and influential family in France. Despite his privileged background, he had a deeply troubled past marked by violence, substance abuse, and reckless behavior. His family's wealth often shielded him from serious consequences, allowing him to escape legal trouble multiple times. From an early age, Matteo displayed aggressive tendencies. Teachers and classmates described him as unpredictable and prone to violent outbursts. He had a history of bullying, intimidation, and even physical assaults. However, each time he crossed the line, his parents' influence ensured that his actions were dismissed as youthful mistakes. Before transferring to the boarding school where he met Anès Maran, Matteo had already been involved in several disturbing incidents. Reports suggest that he had once attacked a fellow student during a drunken rage, leaving the victim with serious injuries. Another time, he was accused of harassing a young girl, but the case was quietly dropped due to lack of evidence. Rumors swirled that his parents had intervened to silence the accusations. Despite these red flags, Matteo continued down a dark path, unchecked and unchallenged. His unchecked aggression, entitlement, and lack of remorse would ultimately lead to one of the most horrifying crimes in recent history: the brutal murder of Anès Maran. At first, Matteo denied any involvement. He claimed he had not seen Anès that evening, brushing off any suggestion that they had met. But his story quickly began to crumble. Witnesses placed them together near the woods on the outskirts of town. A few locals even recalled hearing a heated argument between a young man and a girl matching Anès's description. When police questioned Matteo again, his alibi changed. Now he admitted to meeting her but insisted she left shortly after. The inconsistencies in his story immediately raised suspicion. What alarmed investigators even more was Matteo's appearance the day after Anès disappeared. He returned home with fresh scratches on his arms and face, an unusual sight even for someone as reckless as him. When asked about them, he dismissed their concerns with an unconvincing explanation. He had tripped and fallen into a thorny bush while walking through the woods. But the scratches were deep and irregular, not the kind one would get from a simple fall. To the police, it seemed like evidence of a struggle. As they dug deeper into Matteo's past, a disturbing pattern emerged. He had a history of violent outbursts, including fights and threats, but each time he had escaped punishment, thanks to his wealthy and influential parents. Teachers and classmates described him as manipulative and dangerous, someone who could turn cruel at the slightest provocation. The more the investigators learned, the more convinced they became that Matteo was hiding something. Determined to find answers, authorities expanded their search to the wooded area where Matteo was last seen with Anès. A chilling discovery soon confirmed their worst fears. cadaver dogs picked up traces of human scent in a remote spot deep within the forest, and nearby, officers found a torn piece of fabric. It was later matched to the clothing Anès had been wearing that night. The discovery sent a wave of dread through the investigation. With growing evidence against him, Matteo was brought in for more questioning. This time, he couldn't hide his nervousness. His hands trembled, his voice wavered, and every response seemed more desperate than the last. The weight of the truth was closing in on him, and soon there would be nowhere left to run. 2 days after Anès Maran vanished, the search took a devastating turn. Deep in the dense forests on the outskirts of town, authorities made a chilling discovery. Hidden beneath a thick layer of fallen leaves and broken branches lay the lifeless body of the 13-year-old girl. The scene was gruesome. Her body was mutilated and partially burned, as though someone had desperately tried to destroy the evidence of a horrific crime. The forest was eerily silent as forensic experts arrived, carefully preserving the crime scene. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and charred remains. It was clear that whoever had done this had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. But despite the attempt, vital clues remained. Anès's clothing was torn and stained with blood, and her hands bore deep scratches, clear signs that she had fought back. The burns on her body were incomplete, suggesting that the perpetrator had either been interrupted or panicked before the fire could fully consume the evidence. Nearby, investigators found remnants of a lighter and traces of an accelerant, indicating a deliberate attempt to set the body ablaze. Forensic specialists worked tirelessly, collecting every piece of potential evidence. As they examined Anès's hands, they made a crucial discovery: skin and DNA particles lodged under her fingernails. It was clear she had struggled fiercely against her attacker, clawing at them in a desperate attempt to escape. The recovered DNA was quickly sent for analysis, and within hours, the results came back. The match was undeniable. Matteo Mulas. This single piece of evidence shattered any remaining doubts. Matteo had not only been with Anès that night, but had engaged in a violent struggle with her, one that had ended in murder. Investigators now had both a motive and a prime suspect, but the question remained: why had Matteo killed her? With the weight of this horrifying discovery, authorities moved swiftly to bring Matteo into custody. But as they prepared for his arrest, the full dark truth of what happened that night was about to be revealed. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Matteo Mulas could no longer maintain his web of lies. Under intense interrogation, he finally broke down and confessed to the brutal murder of Anès Maran. His chilling admission sent shockwaves through the investigation. Matteo revealed that he had deliberately lured Anès into the woods under false pretenses, convincing her that he wanted to talk in private. Anès, trusting but cautious, agreed to meet him. However, as soon as they were alone in the darkness, Matteo's true intentions became clear. When Anès resisted his advances, he became enraged. His temper, already known to be volatile, exploded into uncontrollable violence. He grabbed her by the throat, squeezing harder and harder as she fought desperately for her life. The struggle was intense. Anès scratched at his arms and face, trying to break free, but Matteo was stronger and fueled by fury. Within moments, her body went limp. Instead of panicking or showing regret, Matteo coldly calculated his next move. Knowing that authorities would launch a search, he decided to destroy the evidence. He dragged Anès' lifeless body deeper into the woods, where he poured an accelerant over her and set her on fire. The flames flickered for a moment before the damp environment smothered them, leaving her body partially burned but still identifiable. With no remorse, Matteo walked away from the gruesome scene, confident that he had covered his tracks. As investigators delved deeper into Matteo's past, a disturbing pattern emerged. This was not his first violent act. Far from it. Before transferring to the elite boarding school, Matteo had attended another prestigious institution where he was expelled under suspicious circumstances. At just 15, he had attacked a fellow student, beating him so severely that the boy had to be hospitalized. The reason? A trivial argument that Matteo took as a personal offense. However, thanks to his influential parents, the case was silenced, and he was quietly transferred instead of facing criminal charges. There were whispers of other disturbing incidents: cruelty towards animals, violent outbursts, and an unsettling fascination with death. Former classmates recalled how he would speak about getting away with anything because of his family's wealth. Yet, despite these warning signs, his parents continued to shield him from consequences, believing he would eventually mature. But Matteo didn't change. His violence only escalated. And now, that unchecked rage had taken Anès's life. What horrified investigators most was not just the crime itself, but Matteo's complete lack of remorse. As he described the murder, his voice remained cold and detached, as if he were recounting an ordinary event. He showed no guilt, no regret, only indifference. His confession left authorities and the public stunned. This wasn't a crime of impulse. It was the act of someone who felt entitled to take whatever he wanted, no matter the cost. The murder of Anès Maran was not just another crime. It was a case that gripped the entire nation. The brutal nature of the act, combined with Matteo Mulas's complete lack of remorse, horrified the public. News outlets covered every detail, and people across France demanded justice for the young girl whose life had been so cruelly taken. The trial was one of the most high-profile cases in recent French history. The courtroom was packed every day with journalists, legal experts, and members of the public eager to witness how the justice system would handle such a shocking crime. Anès's devastated parents sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief, while Matteo remained emotionless, showing no sign of regret. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against Matteo. Forensic experts detailed how Anès had fought for her life, pointing to the scratches on Matteo's arms and the DNA found under her fingernails. The burn patterns on her body, along with traces of accelerant found at the scene, proved that Matteo had tried to destroy the evidence. Witnesses, including Anès's close friends, testified that she had mentioned meeting a mysterious young man on the night she disappeared. Surveillance footage from a nearby cafe showed Matteo and Anès leaving together, and phone records placed Matteo at the crime scene. His conflicting statements and disturbing past only reinforced the prosecution's argument that this was a premeditated act of violence, not a crime of passion or an accident. Matteo's defense team attempted to paint him as a troubled youth, arguing that his privileged but emotionally distant upbringing had contributed to his violent tendencies. His lawyers pleaded for leniency, claiming that he could be rehabilitated. They even suggested that his drug use had played a role in his erratic behavior. However, the prosecution destroyed these arguments by highlighting Matteo's history of aggression. They presented school records detailing his expulsion for a violent assault, along with testimonies from former classmates who recalled his manipulative and dangerous tendencies. Psychologists who evaluated Matteo described him as narcissistic, incapable of empathy, and likely to reoffend if ever released. After weeks of grueling testimony, the jury took only a few hours to reach a verdict. When the judge read the sentence, a hush fell over the courtroom. Matteo Mulas was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. This ruling made him only the second teenager in French history to receive such a harsh sentence. The court determined that Matteo was beyond rehabilitation and posed a permanent threat to society. The decision sent a strong message. Wealth and privilege would not shield criminals from justice. As Matteo was led away in handcuffs, he remained emotionless, showing the same chilling indifference he had displayed throughout the trial. Meanwhile, Anès's family wept, knowing that while no punishment could bring their daughter back, at least the person responsible for her death would never walk free again. The case of Anès Maran became a symbol of justice in France. It sparked nationwide conversations about youth violence, privilege, and the failures of the system to recognize dangerous behavior before it was too late. Laws regarding juvenile sentencing were reevaluated, and stricter monitoring of violent young offenders was proposed. Anès's parents later established a foundation in her memory, dedicated to helping at-risk youth and advocating for victims of violent crimes. Though her life was tragically cut short, Anès Maran's story became a catalyst for change, ensuring that her memory would not be forgotten. Anès Maran's story is a chilling reminder that danger can sometimes hide behind a familiar face. Share this story to spread awareness about the importance of recognizing red flags and protecting those at risk. If you want to hear more true crime cases that uncover the dark truths behind shocking crimes, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Crime Tales Across Time signing off.